If Europe cannot defend Greenland, it's already finished. There are moments in geopolitics when a seemingly marginal question exposes a far larger truth. Whether Europe can defend Greenland is one such moment. The issue is not the icy island itself, vast, sparsely populated, strategically valuable but politically peripheral to most Europeans. The issue is what the continent's reaction to the idea of losing it reveals about Europe's actual position in the international order. If Europe cannot even plausibly contest an American claim, formal or informal, over Greenland, then it is not merely weak. It is structurally dependent. And dependence, in geopolitics, is simply sovereignty with an expiry date. The eternal American state. 2 decades ago, Robert Cooper, a former foreign policy advisor to Tony Blair, described the modern world with characteristic bluntness. The rest of the world, he wrote, reacts to America, fears America, lives under American protection, envies, resents, plots against, depends on America. The United States, in turn, seeks what Cooper called effective invulnerability, a condition in which no external actor can meaningfully constrain its freedom of action. The personalities in the White House change. The strategic impulse does not. As with the British Empire before it, American domestic politics oscillate, but the interests of the American state endure. The task of any administration is to pursue them, the task of allies is to adjust. Seen in this light, Donald Trump's foreign policy does not represent a rupture so much as a clarification. Bombing Iran, removing Nicolas Maduro, threatening Colombia, musing aloud about Greenland, these are not incoherent impulses. They are expressions of a worldview in which geography, leverage, and coercion matter more than etiquette. We need it for defense, Trump says of Greenland. And for once, he is not wrong. Greenland is not the point. Greenland sits astride the North Atlantic and the Arctic approaches, increasingly valuable as ice retreats and great power competition migrates northward. To American strategists, it is a forward defensive asset, one that sits awkwardly under the sovereignty of Denmark, a country incapable of defending it alone and dependent on American protection to defend itself. To Europeans, Greenland is an embarrassment. It forces a question they have spent decades avoiding. What would happen if American interests diverged sharply from Europe's own? The official European reaction has been tellingly anemic. Danish officials mutter about international law. Britain's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, politely urges restraint. Brussels produces statements heavy on values and light on consequences. There is no credible threat, because there is no credible capacity. Europe is not going to fight America. It cannot. America is not going to fight Europe. It does not need to. Power asymmetry renders conflict unnecessary. Leverage, not landing craft. If Washington truly wanted to alter Greenland's status, it would not do so with marine storming nuke in the dead of night. It would do so with leverage. That leverage is already in place. American troops underpin European security. American weapons determine the outcome on Europe's eastern flank. American intelligence, logistics, and command structures hold NATO together. A Trump administration intent on extracting concessions would simply begin reprioritizing. New Arctic installations would be framed as necessary for homeland defense. European deployments would be described as unsustainable. Treaty adjustments would be presented as technical necessities rather than political demands. The diplomatic language would be soothing. The strategic reality would be brutal. Europe would acquiesce, not because it agrees, but because it lacks alternatives. Empire by invitation, revisited, this condition has a name. Geert Lundestad famously described the post-war transatlantic order as an empire by invitation. Europe welcomed American power onto the continent, trading autonomy for security, influence for insurance. For decades, the bargain worked. American and European interests broadly aligned. The constraints rarely chafed because they were rarely tested. But empires by invitation are still empires. And invitations can be reinterpreted. As American relative power declines, its strategic priorities harden. Protecting the homeland, securing Asia, dominating critical technologies, these goals do not always align with underwriting European comfort. Nearly 3 years ago, Elbridge Colby argued that America lacked the military capacity to remain deeply engaged in Europe while ensuring deterrence in Asia. Today, Colby sits at the center of American defense planning. His argument has become policy. Europe is discovering that dependence on a power with diverging interests is not merely uncomfortable. It is dangerous. Strategic autonomy, a hobby. Not a policy. Europe talks endlessly about strategic autonomy. It balks consistently at paying for it. Defense budgets rise in rhetoric and stall in reality. Industrial capacity remains fragmented. Political consensus collapses at the first sign of domestic inconvenience. Security, for decades, was outsourced, comfortably, cheaply, and with moral self-satisfaction. The assumption was simple: America would always be there. That assumption is no longer safe. The invisible kill switch. Europe's dependence extends far beyond soldiers and tanks. Economically, the imbalance is just as stark. The European Union boasts the world's largest single market, but it does not control the infrastructure that makes modern economies function. Payment systems, cloud storage, search engines, social media platforms, iModels, these are overwhelmingly American. Data sovereignty is discussed in Brussels seminars. Digital sovereignty is postponed to the next Commission cycle. In a serious dispute, the kill switch is not in Brussels. It is in Washington. Europe's frantic search for alternatives is not innovation. It is late-stage anxiety, the return of the jungle. The mistake European leaders made was philosophical as much as strategic. They believed that law and markets had replaced power, rather than merely disguising it. Ariel Rubinstein, in Economic Fables, reminds readers that the rules we treat as immutable are often contingent. He was writing about economics. The lesson applies equally to geopolitics. International law does not abolish force. It presupposes it. Markets do not tame power. They operate at its pleasure. The law of the jungle does not disappear. It sleeps. When it wakes, wealth becomes negotiable, sovereignty becomes conditional, and rules are rewritten by those who can enforce them. Lessons Europe once knew. History offers no shortage of warnings. The Western Roman Empire outsourced its defense to foreign allies, and was eventually deposed by them. The Normans arrived in southern Italy as mercenaries and stayed as rulers. The Mamluks began as slave soldiers and ended as sultans. Dependence always begins politely. It rarely ends that way. Europe's leaders are now relearning lessons their predecessors understood instinctively. Once you rely on a foreign force for security and a foreign power for prosperity, you are no longer fully sovereign. Culture, values, and moral rhetoric do not compensate for this. Soft power cannot substitute for hard capability. Economic heft does not matter if someone else controls the system it runs on. Greenland as verdict. Greenland is not a casus belli. It is a verdict. If Europe cannot defend Greenland, not militarily, not diplomatically, not economically, then it cannot defend the order it claims to represent. Its sovereignty exists on loan. Its autonomy is conditional. Its future depends on the goodwill of a power whose interests are increasingly elsewhere. Trump did not create this reality. He merely stopped pretending it was not there. If Europe wants to remain a geopolitical actor rather than a protected space, it will have to pay the price it has deferred for decades. If it does not, then the question of Greenland will not be the last time it discovers that its fate is decided elsewhere. And if it cannot defend Greenland, Europe is not merely weak, it is finished.